to the club. Cool. I'll make you guys hosts as well so that you guys can also control stuff. Okay. Make co-host.
Well,
Can I make Shayor co-host? Yeah, I can. Okay. আমি Bangladesh Debating Council. আচ্ছা, Alright, admit করলাম, guys.
one question before we move forward. Aadit, যখন slides করবো after তোর slides, মানে তুই তো screen share করছিস, so you will continue to have to click on going to the next slides for
Yeah,
both.
that's okay.
Okay,
That's
cool.
okay. Alright. Okay. Admit all. Hi. Wait. I guess we can start, right? Start it on me.
Yep.
Right. Cool. Okay. So I'll start and then like we can introduce ourselves and then we just get into the presentation. So hi guys, welcome to a Digital Academy session. So my name is Zahid Aadit. If you wanna.
Hey guys, welcome to this digital camp. My name is Shayor, Lamia.
Hi guys, my name's Lamia Noor. I'm looking forward to a great session.
Yeah. So we just want to start off by saying a few things about the session and like what we're going to do and how we're going to go about it. So I think just in general, this session is, if you've experienced or like participated in previous academy sessions, I'm sure you know that they're quite technical and have a lot of debating like strategy and all of that. So this session is a bit more chill because what we're going to focus on and prioritize on is just understanding how we prepare for debates best. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to take you through all three of our journeys, and we're going to talk about the highs, the lows, and the things we did in order for us to be the debaters we are today. And I think it applies for anyone and everyone. So if you're preparing for a tournament like pre-worlds, if you're just a beginner at debate, I think you can use a lot of these tips. This is not an exhaustive list, and I'm sure that you can find your own methods, but these are just suggestions and things that we've done, which you can always adapt to or like use to make your own things work better for you as well. All right, getting started. So we'll start off with the presentation. Also, last thing is that we also encourage you guys to interact with us. So if you do have any questions, you guys can type it in the question, like in the chat box, and then if we could entertain those questions either mid-session or at the end, depending on who's presenting. But you're free to do so because we want this session to be interactive. We feel like that's the best way we can go about this. Right, okay. All right, so hi, Aadit, Zahid Aadit. So the way that I'll go about this is because we're all going to the debate stories, I wanted to talk about 5 important things in my debating life and the lessons I've learned from all of them. So I want to start off with I started debating in 2020, and then I founded my club, Wilson's Debating Association, from my school, Sir John Wilson School, in 2020. I continued that in 2021, but then in 2022 is when I started getting some relative debate success, where I entered the development team. When the contingent, we had Shayor, and then in 2023, I was obviously in the WSDC team, also with Shayor, and then also post WSDC and how I debated alongside Shayor and a lot of other people and how that went about. Shayor has been a constant for a lot of these things, as you can see. So just a quick introduction to me. I'm a freshman at Boston University. I'm studying economics and computer science. Again, I started debating 2020 and I represent that. That's what I look like, if you can't tell by my face right now. How did my debating journey start? I think everyone has a unique perspective on this, but my one was actually more fun in a way that it was very impromptu. Because I was very invested in public speaking events, especially the one which shall not be named, MUNs. But I've always wanted to enter debate, but we didn't have much support from our school. So my first teammates, my senior Mahir Bhai and my best friend Shadman, they sent me a text, as you can see over here, where he was explaining the rules of the World Schools format. And we ended up doing the tournament. It was Aga Khan Inter-School Debate Festival. And we ended up winning the novice category of that tournament. Even though we had no coach, I had no idea how debate went. We just knew we were giving 8 MUN speeches because it was 8 minutes, right? Um, so we felt really good and it felt really nice. But then obviously COVID hit, which affected a lot of us, especially Shayor, Lamia, and I, and I'm sure a lot of you over here. So the next slide talks about how I cope with the online debate era. Takeaways that I feel like are also quite uh, important and relevant in today's debating days. So obviously, I attended Pre-Worlds 2020. That was my second debate tournament. I didn't have any coaches. I didn't have any support. And I also lost the novice finals, which was very depressing. And then that's when I decided to find an institutional club. WDA was born. It was the first debate club at school. I hired a coach, Zahid. He's been a very big part of my journey. So I also wanted to shout out about him and also talk about the importance that a coach has in your journey. Um, but I think the most important thing that I learned from the club is that I practice debate almost every alternate day. And I'll talk more about this later on. And the other thing that I did is because of online debating, I think while accessibility to local tournaments decreased, accessibility to debating in general for a lot of people increased because of the fact that you could just do an international tournament or do an online tournament at the comfort of your own house. So the way that I coped with it is that I just ended up attending a lot of these, which eventually helped me become a better debater because of the practice that I got from all of these tournaments and just debates in general. Um, yeah, and then I have a shout out to Said Khair. He introduced me to debating. He's very harsh and straightforward, and also a constant in my debating journey. But I'll get to like coaching and why that's important. Uh, about WTA and the club, I think the three things that I've always had as important parts of my journey as a club member in an institution is that there was community, there was competitiveness, and there was consistency. I know a lot of you over here have institutional support, and a lot of you don't. So most of the slide goes to like everyone here, regardless of where you're from, because I also was someone who didn't have institutional support. I had to make it. So for the ones who don't have it, it's always uh it's it's quite it's not easy to make it, but it's accessible to make your own community. And I feel like it's very important to make your own community and find people that you trust. So why is that important? Because firstly, in WDA, the community I had, I ran a tournament, I made great friends and memories, and we had movie nights almost every weekend. So it was really nice to bond with people, especially nerds like us. So we could find like common bonds, common nerdy things to talk about, philosophy, economics, politics, all of that. Really, really boring stuff. But it felt nice knowing that there were other people from that small niche community that cared about it as much as I did. Secondly, competitiveness. I think a club is really important because it fosters quality of debating, right? You have a lot of people who care about winning, and I think debating is the fact that it's inherently a sport means that you want to win, which means it's important to always practice, keep up with work, train, and also do a lot of tournaments. I wrote international tournaments here, but I also think it applies to local tournaments, given that the accessibility to local tournaments now is like way more, it's way more accessible because of the lack of COVID, rather. And thirdly, I feel like the most important thing that a club gives you is consistency, which means you have to keep training regularly. You have to make sure that you keep up with as many tournaments. But it's very important to always remember that you cannot burn out because sometimes we choose to prioritize debating, and especially when we're in a club or in a setting with other people who are also debating as much as us, we keep pushing ourselves, but then we push ourselves to the extent in which we just feel we feel less good about every debate that we do. So we would rather not have that, and we would rather feel happy after debate rather than I don't want to do this anymore. Um, and then obviously after my WDA years, I had a debating breakthrough where I ended up becoming the second best speaker in field in 2021. I ended up getting into the development team. But with all of these breakthroughs in debating, and even without it, there were a lot of rewards, obviously. The first thing is obviously confidence. You feel much more confident about yourself and your own journey because you've succeeded and you've done good things. Secondly, I think the unique thing about debating is that you meet a lot of people, people that you end up becoming really good friends with, and people that you always remember. But there are also a lot of difficulties in debating, especially when you're at that level in which you've done it for a while and you find it rewarding. Firstly, you end up in debates or in groups where you find people that are much better than you, or you think are much better than you, or you think are way more accomplished than you. So you feel a sense of imposter syndrome. Secondly, when you're so into debating, it's hard to balance debating with education, given that we're all, majority of us, I'm assuming, in the call are like high school or university students. So it's important to keep that balance and prioritize things when you need to. And thirdly, obviously in debating, you deal with losses. For me, a loss was not getting into Team Bangladesh and actually getting into the development team. So dealing with that was also part of the journey and the way that I got through it. Um, wait, sorry. So how do I deal with a lot of these failures? I think there's a lot of ways to deal with it, but the way that I deal with it is four ways, right? Firstly, I always remind myself that I have a lot of people who I love and cherish and who also respect me in the same way that I do them, who are involved in this thing. So it's important to communicate with them. I remember when I didn't make it into Team Bangladesh, one of my biggest support systems was obviously my best friend Shadman, who was quite helpful. But another person was actually a person who did make Team Bangladesh that year, and Shayor, right? Where Shayor became a good friend. And even though Shayor got what I wanted and I didn't, it was important for me to talk to him because I could communicate my feelings and just have a support system telling me that it's not over and you always have another shot. And that did work out for me, right? But secondly, you always get second chances. Now, second chances can come in a lot of ways. By second chances, I don't mean that, oh, if you miss out on WSDC, you can get to do WSDC again. I know for a lot of us that isn't the case. But in debating in general, isn't a journey that ends after school. You have your university years, you have so many more rewarding things to do with debating or being involved with debating, even after you're done with a lot of these school activities or years. So you always get second chances to redeem yourself and to prove to yourself that you're really, that whatever you did was rewarding and whatever you did was fulfilling. Thirdly, you obviously learn a lot from the setbacks. I think every loss that you get in debating, whether it be not being able to meet your standards or meet the expectation that you set for yourself, maybe it's just an important debate round that you lost for which you couldn't break at a tournament. It's important to learn what you did wrong or what you could have done better and to take all of that in because that's valuable for the next things and the next debating experiences that you'll have. And the last thing I want to say is that debating is really not the end of this world. And I know it's very ironic that three debaters are probably going to say the same thing, people who spend a lot of time in this, but there is a lot of ways to get happiness in this life that is not debating. So even if you like fail in debating or like a tournament or maybe a goal that you had, it's completely okay. Because at the end of the day, it's just a sport and a lot of things happen. A lot of luck is involved in it as well. So you can't beat yourself over it and you can't treat yourself as a failure just because of one random thing that happened to you. It's completely okay for us to fail. All of us, Shayor, Lamia, and I have all failed in debating in one way or the other, and we still dealt with it and we still pushed on. And I think that's very important. The most important part of my journey, I feel like the ending of my debating journey was WSDC, both in 2023 and in 2024. I didn't participate in 2024 as a judge, but there are a lot of important things that I've learned. Firstly, I kept a few pictures because I felt like it was nice. You can see the Shires in almost every one of them. Um, so we get a lot of uh, Shire cameos in my presentation. But I think a lot of things that I've learned from WSDC um, translates to a lot of the things that you guys will be able to prepare yourself for pre-worlds or other big tournaments that you're coming into. For a lot of the people who go into NAT camp, for a lot of the people who are just doing pre-worlds as their first tournament, pre-worlds as their 10th, 20th, it doesn't matter. Just these are takeaways that you can implement everywhere. Firstly, I learned how to prepare myself for a large tournament with a lot of stakes. Secondly, I learned how to communicate with my teammates and my coaches. Thirdly, I learned how debating allows us to meet so many new people. And fourthly, I think the most important thing is I learned that winning isn't the most important part of a journey. And this is more of a life lesson, but I'll include debating in it. Um, right. So getting into detail, how to prep for it, right? I think the first thing is that you have to use whatever resources you have. So with pre-worlds coming up, a lot of by resources I mean like things like your coaches, if you do have a coach. Secondly, your club, if you do have a club, uh, and whether it be your friends and teammates, whether it be other people that you know who've done debating before, or who are still involved, people who are also competing in pre-worlds with you, And obviously, the most accessible one is the internet. You'll find multiple videos on like so many things of debating, whether it be like preparing for tournaments, whether it be creating matter files. These are technical things that we'd rather not tell you how to do, but we're telling you the ways that you can figure it out and the way that you can fix it for yourself. The reason why I have make new ones if needed is because of the things I said in the beginning. Like if you don't have a club, if you don't have a coach, these are things that are still pretty fixable because you don't need to hire a coach. You can just find people who've done this and communicate with them. You can work together to find things that you want to work on or to use. And obviously, Digital Academy in and of itself is a great platform. You can do the sparring platform. Sparring ground is a great way to use resources, and you can watch the videos. They're amazing. Secondly, you watch videos for content strategy and style. You can watch debating videos. You can watch sessions taken by really good debaters. Thirdly, you obviously prep with your team. I'm sure if you are doing pre-world or doing any other tournament, you will have teammates. So it's important to get to know them well, to communicate with them, to know your strengths and weaknesses, to do debates, and just to have fun in the experience. The last thing that I want to say is that in large tournaments, sometimes bad things can happen in which shocks can happen. Things don't work out the way you want them to. And it's okay to expect that because sometimes in life, especially in debating, luck plays a large factor in what guarantees success and what doesn't. So it's okay that you lose out on rounds that you didn't expect to lose out or you don't break. So expecting the worst sometimes is good because it helps you cope with whatever will happen in these big tournaments because sometimes it's hard to say. Right. So what can you expect in these big tournaments, right? So you've prepared for it, but how do you expect like what can you expect from it? I think first thing is you can expect to meet new people. I think debating is a niche community and there's very few people who do it, especially in a country like Bangladesh. We see that it's a growing community, but it's still quite a small community. But I think it's quite nice because like it's a contradiction and it's quite opposite, but even though it's a small community, you get to meet people from multiple backgrounds, whether it be their schools, their beliefs, their preferences, whatever it is. You meet new people with different ideas, with different experiences in life, with so many different stories to tell. And I think that's really nice because you get to know so much about the world, about the country, about other people. You get to meet new friends, and I think that's been an experience for both, like all three of us over here, where we've met people who have become really good friends for us eventually. Um, Secondly, obviously, you get extremely valuable feedback, especially for the ones attending pre-worlds, for the ones attending international tournaments later on, or even the ones doing NAT camp, even the ones doing small inter-school debate tournaments across the country. I think sometimes you have really good judges and really good debaters in the country and eventually the world who end up participating. So it's extremely important to talk to them if you're lucky enough for them to judge around. And even if they don't judge around, it's quite okay to just approach them and ask questions. They're quite friendly and they're willing to help. Thirdly, obviously, shocks, like the thing I mentioned, it's okay if you end up in disagreement, if you have conflicts with other people, but it's extremely important to know that you have to resolve it, and it's extremely important to know that of like how to deal with it. And I'll talk about that later on. And fourthly, you can just expect a great learning experience. But I think the most important part of this is that you have to be willing to learn. So if you don't want to learn, then you won't. But if you're willing to keep an open mind and learn from the things that you've done, then it's extremely valuable. Okay, how to get good? I think this is the most important part because I feel like this is a question that a lot of people will have. How, in my own debating journey, did I end up becoming good? Uh, Firstly, I think the most important thing that it is keep practicing, right? Like I mentioned in my debate story, when I founded the club, I ended up debating almost every alternate weekend with my club members. I did multiple international tournaments because the ease of access. I did a lot of local tournaments eventually after COVID simmered down. I ended up debating a lot. So the more you practice, the more you keep up with debating, I think the better you're going to be. But it's again important to not burn out. So make sure that you can balance it. Secondly, I think it's extremely important to relate debate to everyday life. I think a lot of us see debate as this like game of chess where we have to think out of the box, where we have to think generationally, really like heavy strategy. But I think that's not true. I think debating echoes and reflects life way more than we think. The way we operate in real life is the way we think in debates. So it's important to think simple and just simplify debate and relate it to things that you do every day. And I think that's a great way in which you're able to prepare for how to be better or how to debate. Thirdly, you watch as many debate videos and sessions, as I've mentioned. And I think this is really important for style, strategy, and content, especially because you can find a lot of similarities in good debaters and you can adapt from them, right? Like I myself have seen a lot of Sajid Karmakar debates while I was still a novice and when I was quite new to debating. So I ended up adapting a lot of those things. And then eventually I had the fortune of being coached by people like Sir Paul. So even learning from them and being able to adapt their styles using whatever techniques that they use, the way that they frame debates, the way that they use their strategy, the way that they build arguments, or even the way that they speak to me was quite um, special. And I adapted a lot of those things, which I feel like helped me become the debater I am and also helped me reach my own potential as in my own style, right? Fourthly, I think it's important to reach out to the good debaters. I think you can do this in a tournament and even outside. Like it's completely okay if you send a text to Shayor, Lamia, or me. I'm sure, I hope they don't bite. I'm sure I don't. So we'll definitely reach out. We'll offer advice. You can text anyone, you can ask anyone. And obviously, you have Digital Academy, you have the BDC group. You have so many places and so many resources to ask people questions. So I think it's really important that you do so. And it's quite helpful that you do so. I also think that it's important that you keep up with current affairs. This doesn't take a lot of time, and I don't think you have to like spend 3 hours reading the newspaper every day. You can spend 10 to 20 minutes reading one article on a certain topic, or watch one video from Vox, or maybe watch one video, or like read one article from The Economist. I think that'll be good enough. As long as you know certain things that are happening, it's extremely valuable in debates that deal with economics, politics, or even debates that deal with social affairs, and you'll be able to use that quite valuably in those rounds. Uh, then I think sixthly, you should try to rationalize your thoughts and everyday decisions you make. What do I mean by this? By this I mean that if I have a conversation, I remember once I was talking to my mom, and I probably gave her like 3 reasons as to why I should order pizza, right? Even though she was quite hesitant on not or like on ordering pizza. So I feel like debating is in and of itself just uh like uh just uh a way of like strategizing your own thoughts and building on it, making those right decisions. So I think the way that you do that best is if even in like your regular life, you can just um find ways in which you can communicate with people in a way that you build those decisions and you rationalize your thoughts in a way that you would in a debate. Um, Seventhly, I think it's extremely important to like expect setbacks and losses. I think it's a part of the process of like becoming a good debater in which you're willing to understand and accept defeat and accept losses. But it's extremely important to learn from them instead of sulk or get depressed and quit debating, which I think a lot of like all three of us have at one point have had, where after a loss we're like, you know what, I cannot do this anymore, I'm done. But then we all came back and we all learned from our experiences of loss, and I think that's extremely important. Lastly, I think it's essential that you find the balance. It's easy to get lost in debate land. Once you start doing it, I think you get obsessed with it, especially if you're a beginner. And it's the only thing that you dream of. It's the only thing you see. And it's the only thing you want to do. But I think you cannot deprioritize important things like your education, your social life, and other things that matter to you, right? So it's essential and it's crucial to remind yourself that even if you're preparing for pre-worlds, there are other things that you should be doing. So time allocation, time management, your education, all of these things become important in the way that you like work around debating, right? Um, Lastly, I think the most important thing that I've learned from debating is that you can find your own romances. As you can see, this is Shire and me having a lot of fun together. So there were a lot of pictures that I legally cannot use. So I just ended up using three to show you that you can make really good friends. You can find your own romances and you can make friends for the rest of your life. So I think debating in and of itself is just a way for you to be able to do that. Um, but that's pretty much it for me. Just to conclude, I want to remind you that the most important takeaways from my debating journey is that I needed a community. So my club and the way that I founded a club and the people that I've made, that I've met, the people that I've become friends with, all helped me deal with the difficulties of debating, the pressures of debating, the losses in debating. So I think community matters a lot to you. And especially if you're if you're like a beginner, if you're a newbie starting off this journey, you need to find a group of people. Um, and that in and of itself is like quite helpful. Secondly, I think it's extremely important to be consistent with your practice and your preparation for tournaments and debates. You need to be consistent. You need to train regularly. You need to use your resources adequately. You need to be able to know how to use the resources. And for that, you can obviously use the internet. You can use the resources that already exist. And you can reach out to people like your friends or even other very good debaters that you've never spoken to, but I'm sure a text can't hurt. The worst they can do is not respond, but nothing worse than that, I promise. And the last thing is, I think, is that you have to expect failure, because in the pursuit of happiness, we're all led to like some deep pits of not too happy moments. We're quite sad or we end up quite depressed because something that we wanted didn't happen, or something that we wanted to work out in a certain way didn't work out that way. So it's extremely important to remind yourself that this isn't the end of it. You always get other chances, and there's always other ways in which you can use debating to make your life fulfilling. By getting into a great university, by making a lot of new friends. So even if you haven't won a tournament, you've met very important people that will always remain important to you. So debating in and of itself is a valuable asset for other things that can also reward you as much, or if more, than debating in and of itself can. So I think that's it for me. I'll hand it over to Lamia, who's gonna continue with her own presentation and her own story.
Cool beans. Aadit, can you control the slides? Perfect. The one before. Yeah, perfect. All right. Small introduction, guys. I am currently a junior at Hubbard and William Smith Colleges. I am studying economics and management. I started debating, I think, more or less properly around in 2018, and I was a part of ESS. It's actually like known to have generated a lot of really good debaters historically. So unlike Aadit's whole struggle, I already had a debate team with like really great mentors. I think one of the primary struggles that still remained was, funnily enough, after a certain point, I think my immediate mentor was Adi Bhaiya and Shreyan. Right after they had left, weirdly, everybody left the club also at the same time. Nobody was interested in club. And there was a solid minute. I was the only debater in ESSDC. So kind of had to rebuild the whole legacy, run through recruiting and get people interested into a sport again. But I think that's more or less like how my school journey looked. Adit, next slide. A little bit about like why I think I debated or I start like just continue debate is genuinely, I think it's freaking cool. I'm not going to encourage this, but for most of my life, I found academics a little boring. I'm not saying, or nor is this a shade to anyone who loves academics. I just always thought that I wanted to be able to put into practice a lot of my knowledge that I'm consuming or anything that I'm learning that wasn't quite really satisfactory with how Bangladeshi academic or educational structures work. So when I got into debate team and I found the club in my school, I just thought that was amazing that like for 8 whole minutes, nobody's going to interrupt me from speaking. And like, I just get to have that time to myself. Second, I think competitive spirit is actually kind of really cool. The fact that you feel the nerve-wracking emotions right before a speech, during a speech, and that emotion when you also have your first win in a round, your first loss. I think the spectrum of emotions I've felt as a result of debating, and I'm going to say both good and bad, is crazy to me. And that's kind of had me keep going, is the adrenaline rush, and at the same time being able to conquer some of my biggest fears of public speaking. And I'm guessing a lot of you guys are here for the same reason, is that this was something so different from the regular life. Lastly, I think it really did make a lot of difference in terms of my professional life. What I essentially mean by this is it's very hard to sell yourself in Bangladesh with somebody who's like a little different from everyone else, because everyone does the same thing. It's like there's very little avenue for you to explore different sports and do it competitively. And I kind of like, it's very silly, but every time I interviewed for, let's say, small journalistic places with like writing up articles, I was like, yeah, I read a lot, I'm a debater. So things like that, but also very truly the fact that like I am in like US, overly sold, and I think that applies for all three of us. Even if I don't know if the colleges bought it, but I can for sure say when we were applying, we were just internally happy or satisfied, or at least delusion that we're very important than everyone else because we debate, or we made it to some competitive spirit. So I think to a certain extent, even if it doesn't officially materialize, maybe you'll at least have internal satisfaction because of debate. So I think sticking to debate is really cool. 10 out of 10, prioritize a lot of other things in life, but very cool spot to go. So big losses and big wins. I think my big losses will definitely be the fact that I had to continue doing 11 tournaments till I had my first official break and into qualification round. 11 tournaments of feeling like absolutely horrible, and my parents being like, you probably don't know how to do this, you might as well quit. So like, I think it's being able to get through that imposter syndrome and keep it, like stick through it, because it is kind of a game that you get used to it more as you go. Of course, struggles of inconsistent funding, having to pay out of pocket for tournaments, or like just in general difficult schedules, because I'm pretty sure everyone after a certain point gets busy with both like tuition back at home and school and homework, and also the fact that your family might not always be available to like take you to tournaments. So difficult schedules work. But I think you can clearly see that my big wins are so much more than my losses. So I think I speak to the conservative society in Bangladesh particularly, but also women in general. I think in the vast majority of cases, we don't get freedom. It's not normal, even as an 8th, 9th grader, for us to be able to get out of our house without supervision, without having our parents like follow us, or it being a thing. And funnily enough, even in my like my extended family, they like used to take pride in the fact that like a lot of the children don't go out. They're always going out, even not like not going on picnics from school, probably just going out with family to a different resort. So this was actually my main avenue of freedom, which I still to this day feel like was like kind of a breakthrough from my mundane life. Second is obviously clearly friends. But wonderfully, Shayor has lived through all 3 different worlds from me to Aadit. So he's also featuring in my pictures. I think I have carried forward a lot of friends from debate, even to this day. And every time I go back to Bangladesh, like we're always meeting up, including like the team that I was with, anybody from ESS. So I think it's just the fact that we can look back at all the ridiculous things we have done in team and beyond, and like is just, I think, just genuinely has made my life so much nicer. Highlights of my life was getting to world schools in 2021. The second big highlight would be I landed a full ride to my colleges because of debate. There's a specific fund they dedicated to my debate scholarship, and I'm not paying for my education in US. And I think I've been to like 5 countries, and I'm about to travel to Canada this month in the upcoming weekend. Next month, I'm going to UK, and in December, I'm going to Panama. All of these countries, all fully paid because I debate. So I'm not messing with you when I say this. It's gonna take you places, and literal places. And I think the last highlight, one of my absolute favorite ones, is from WEDC this year. We broke 17th, and I had my teammates Sandeep with me. It's just been a phenomenal ride, being able to just like get feedback, meet some of my debate idols that are like crazy smart, and being able to have them take me seriously and think that I'm smart is just double the like thing for me. It's like so much nicer because I just get to bullshit about how great I am. Okay, Aadit, next slide. I think by now I have you convinced that you should debate. Not probably obsessively, but fairly enough. So how do you figure this out? The first thing, I genuinely mean it, is schedule right. I still struggle with this because I'm like, doing college. I'm trying to apply for internships. I have like 4 jobs on campus, and I'm debating and in the debate e-board. But I think all of this is symmetrical to everybody that's in Bangladesh, in the Bangladesh contingent. So the first thing you need to figure out is commitments. Like, what are your commitments that you are dedicated to? It could be your finals. It could be the fact that you have another ECA that you're heavily involved in, or the fact that you're trying to work and gain experience in Bangladesh in different sectors, or like trying to work in different places. So you need to be honest about what your commitments are and how you're gonna go through them. It's like quite silly, but it's important for you to be able to prioritize those commitments and schedule around them. So you don't have to be debating like aggressively every other day. If you have an exam this weekend, debate 10 minutes a day where you just think about a case, or spend an hour listening to a certain podcast or hearing a debate video, or like just going through one debate prep with your teammate. And then for the rest of the week, study. And then when you don't have a finals, when you don't have a lot of family obligations or other obligations, make that week the aggressive debate prep. It doesn't have to be always aggressively doing debate, because I do think that takes out the joy from the sport. And when you make these commitments and schedule around these commitments, genuinely follow through it very consistently. So just because you have a hard week this week shouldn't mean that for the next whole 3 months or 2 months, you just let go of it because you're out of sync. Like, you can always start again from getting prep. So it's important for you to be able to prioritize in certain weeks. It's very important to set goals of how much you want to achieve in a certain amount of time, and then execute and pull through it. So obviously, a lot of us build towards pre-worlds. So every other tournament, maybe you can set a goal of, I'm going to make sure that my case building is more efficient this tournament. So the next tournament, you kind of work around being able to have a more efficient prep or case strategies. So I think that really, really helps when you're able to just set out and map out a goal and work towards it in a discipline. And next slide, Aadit. All right, so I think this is the part that you'll benefit from the most. And I think I saw a question in the chat about philosophical debates, and I'll just answer it in this part. If I miss anything, we'll talk about it by the end. Yeah. So basically, the way I characterize debate, and this is of course up for contention, whether you listen to a different coach, or you have a different mentor, or you relate to another debater who like compartmentalizes debate separately. So like, feel free to absolutely make this questionable. You don't have to follow through it. It's just what I've tried and what's worked for me. So the way I see debate is threefold: strategy, matter, style. And what I would most emphasize on is probably strategy, which is like just building the case for me. And the ways I practice this are like 4 ways. So, and this is something I still implement in British parliamentary debating and university debating today. So the first is, I would probably do all the things of figuring out the components of a case. Like, so the things that you have already been doing and you guys probably also know about, and you will also get all of these sessions in the upcoming Digital Academy session. So some of them can be called burden setting, or arguments or goals you're trying to achieve, anything that people like calling it, wording it. And then we talk a lot about mechanizing an argument, structural reasons, and then we hear a lot of feedback about weighing. So I'd like compartmentalize all of the things that I would like in my speech, whether it's a second speaker DPM, or it's a whip, or it's a PM, and then work towards those goals. So take a week or take 2 weeks where you just focus on structural reasons and you practice that drill, or you practice just burden setting, or you practice just drills for weighing. And I think that really helps break things down, make them more sustainable, reachable, and at the same time, I think just in terms of like implementation, makes it easier because you're trying to fix one thing in one time. And I think that's what I also do with types of motions these days, which is to say, I think I struggle a lot at religion motion, which is kind of ironic. Is I take a bunch of that motion, religion motions, and work underneath it, like keep on doing a bunch of cases. So that's the second part where like I take 10 motions and speed run through them. And I usually pick specific motion types. So it can be a day where I just do religion motions, a day where I'm doing just like IR motion that's specific to China and diplomatic relations, or one that I'm doing specifically to, let's say, family obligation motions or philosophy motions, like you said. So I think one of the best resources is if you go online, there's something called debate.io or OI, either or. I forgot if the I is before O, but it's basically a compilation of like all the motions possible out there from all different circuits. And they also have categories underneath it that says IR and then religion and then institutions. So pick philosophy, find 10 philosophy motions and just speed run through that case, brainstorm. Take a good minute, take an hour, just speed run through 10 different philosophy motions, and you'll kind of start seeing yourself get into a pattern. To make this more efficient, I think philosophy motions also tend to be something that's better when done in duos, or like when you're prepping with like 5 people at the same time. It helps really figure out the core foundation because it tends to be a little like subjective when it comes to philosophy. It's like what we assign value to. So I think that helps. And I think that obviously helps for all different categories of motions as well. Lastly, I think cross-check with your mentors. I will harp on this a lot, and adding to what Aadit said, you probably have some affiliation with somebody in the whole circuit, whether you have an official mentor that's coaching your club or somebody who's given you feedback at a particular tournament and then you followed up and you guys have a good relation. And worst case, if you don't have anybody you can turn to, I'm pretty sure, like Aadit mentioned, all 3 of us would be willing to reply to any queries you have if you personally reach out. So there are a lot of individuals within the Digital Academy and Bangladeshi debate circuit that are willing to really help you out if you make the effort and you reach out. And I think that will really help, because if you've like done 10 different motions and you're like, this is what I thought the motion should be, and this is what I thought the motion should argue, they'll give you some form of feedback or another. And I think that just in itself helps. That's A. Then the second one is matter. For matter, I kind of do something similar where I go for a motion type, whether it's religion or IR. When I look at motions, I realize what I don't know. So if it's a very specific diplomatic relations motion, which I didn't know was a deal that was struck, I officially know what I don't know. So I look things up clearly. And then I go on a speed run of like spiraling around, like making questions under that category, which brings it to the next thing, right? So if I think there was a motion about China doing a diplomacy between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I didn't know much about it, like very little. And I think that's when I went into a speed run about, okay, what is China's intentions here? That's question 1. I need to look that up. I need to build on that matter. Why does Iran and Saudi Arabia not have great relations? I need to find research and stats on that. And then lastly, what will happen if they have better relation? So it's like you build questions and then build matter under it. And I think that really helps with matter building and like make it look less intimidating, because I think having a matter file is something people are always scared of. Like everyone has it, but technically nobody really does it well. So I think this is one way to do it well. And then of course, take any of this and put it to the test, because I think Aadit just got.
Do you want a screen share?
Okay, give me a second. Let me pull it up.
His laptop ran out of charge. He'll join in a bit, but I think you can just screen share.
I could. Give me a second. Hold on, guys. Technical issues.
Welcome back to online debating.
Can you hear me? Am I clearly audible? Shai, can you save the recording?
We're still recording.
Okay, cool. That's perfect. I'm gonna screen share then. And
By the way, Aadit will join in a bit, guys, in case you miss him very much.
oh God. Wait, let me see. Share. Documents. I need to quit Zoom and then come back.
Would you like
Because,
me to screen share?
yeah, if you can, like for some reason.
Yes, that's fine. What was the slide number you're on? Sorry, guys, just give me a second. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, your screen is visible.
Okay, great. Lamia, you're muted.
Picking up from where I stopped. So lastly, when you're done building that matter, 10 out of 10 would suggest putting it to the test. So implement it in a speech where you do finish that IR motion, I think, speech. And I think that genuinely makes it a lot easier and better, because one of the things I think we like almost subconsciously avoid is giving the speech, but that's the hard part. If you consistently do it in your own time and take the matter, it just, the nature of practicing it will allow you to inevitably figure out what more you want to know in terms of stats, but also how to use stats in mechanisms form or in drawing conclusions that are like really relevant to debate speeches. And I think that also applies for obviously philosophy motions, where you take anything that you've read about human behavior or how human beings interact with certain narratives and how it eventually plays out into their life. I think it allows you to truly understand how to use it in a debate speech and just helps in debate real time. One of the grunt work I usually do right before big tournaments is I speed run through some of my like just YouTube videos. And this somehow happened to be one of the most beneficial things for me. Because I think a lot of the issues that are hard is when we are listening to policies or like governments or different IR issues where political instability exists in different countries, or there's a war somewhere out there and the intricacies of how that war is happening right now and these nuances. And I think it really helps when you watch those crunched up videos that like take a lot of really relevant information but push it through in 10 minutes. And I think has really helped me for like difficult motions that are very complicated with their nuances. So this is my absolute favorite thing to do, is just speed run through a lot of important videos. And I feel like once you look up Financial Times, once you look up Vox videos and Economist ones, they'll just list a number of really good videos. And from there, you can take it on. Or you can specifically type up a particular issue that you don't know about, but you think is very relevant and will be a debate thing or a debate motion in the upcoming tournament. I think it helps. Last, style is probably, in my opinion, the least prioritized of how I prep, because I put a lot of efforts in strategy and matter. And I think that like in its nature allows you to develop a good style if you already know what you're saying and also have like concrete understanding of or like facts and stats on like understanding something complicated. A bunch of ways in which I enjoy debate is finding debaters and speeches who I feel like are more proximate to how I debate. So it's true, like one of the people I find the most easily relatable to in terms of debating is probably Sajid Bhab. and how he mechs and how he just numbers everything and makes debate clear. A lot of other debaters that I listen to include like Hamza, because he's just fun to listen to because half the time he's also roasting his other debaters. So I think it's just like you just need to start enjoying and find debaters that you really relate to and just enjoy listening to. Kind of really helps with the confidence game. Implement it. And then, of course, one of the things that I've been told to do, but I don't end up doing, but you guys can try, is reading. Books and reading and good content apparently really helps with the way you structure and frame your debates. So maybe give it a go and see if it works for you. If it does, great. If not, find a debater archetype. Next one. All right. My biggest spiel to all of you guys will be don't give up. Of course, you should definitely prioritize other things in life. But if you know for a fact that debate means something really important to you, but it's just there are a lot of things that you consider and you think about that is like emotionally or just in your own way stopping you from giving up on debate, I really think you shouldn't. Half the time, or like my biggest growth in debate was being able to balance absorbing feedback, but at the same time holding confidence in when I say the things that I say. One of the best, I think, advices somebody gave me was, you're literally just debating against another brain. This whole thing of intimidation should not be an issue because it's likely that the other person knows exactly as much as you, maybe a little bit more at best case, and actually in the most frequent cases, probably knows less than you. So when you say something, it's coming out of intuition. Say it with confidence because it's probably true. Second, time. I really don't see time as a factor. Of course, given that you now have an ability to prep up to pre-worlds, up to camp phase 1. I remember being horrendous at debating for most of my life, having returned to debate in pre-worlds, I think in 2020. And I returned to debating 2 weeks prior to 2020 pre-worlds, and I had taken a 2-year gap at that point. And I felt absolutely hopeless because everyone has probably prepped for a whole year or at least 3-4 months, which is actually usually not true. People don't extensively prep. But I really think like those 2 weeks I prepped every day. I prepped a case every day. I like read 5 articles every day and I gave a speech every day. So, and that also is something that I've done in university debating. With my lead up to Vietnam, I was also just prepped for a month. So if you feel like time is not enough, you'd rather give it your all and everything you have up until the big moment than just giving up on it without having given it your best shot. And third is resources. Resources are actually all around you, even though you don't have institutional, I think, support or a mentor. I mean it when I say there are like probably 5 videos online that talks about just principal debates, 5 videos that probably teach you how to do a religion debate or a philosophy debate or any other forms of debate. And I think that like is important for you to recognize that even when you feel like you don't have a lot, there's just ways to find resources, reach out to people. Debaters just tend to be people who help other because they've been through the part where they've not had resources themselves at one point or another. And I think 4 is don't give in to the whole rep thing, all right? It really doesn't matter. I think talent gets recognized anyway. One of the funniest thing is not a soul knew Shayor when he first ran for Camp 1. And he didn't even have a DP. It was like a black thing, like a black just profile picture. We didn't know who this person was or if he had a face. So this guy just randomly came, ran through all 3 camps and was a team. So like, I promise you when I say this, as much as it can get scary and intimidating because there's a lot of people who sound really good, have debated for long years, will have a hard time if you're just a good damn debater who's worked really hard. So that's my spiel, taking it over to Shayor for all of his wise advices.
All right, great. So, hello everyone. I'm sure you have heard a lot about me by now, but once again, my name is Shayor. I'm a second year at Berkeley. I study economics and computer science. It's not here, but while I was in high school, I used to debate for CGSD for grade 10 when I started. And then I went to DPS, which I guess is now Glenridge. for 11 and 12. So I hopped around a lot. But I think a lot of the similar struggles will be there as well. So a little bit about myself. I was in Team Bangladesh from 2021 to 2023. And fun fact, I was both Aadit and Lamia's teammates. So evidently, I am the key to their success. But more recently, I had the opportunity to coach Team Qatar for WSDC 2024. I'm immensely proud of them. And I think it was a great learning experience for me as well. And I think I want to tell you guys what I learned through that. So why debating, or as I like to call it, professional yapping? I think that ultimately debating just boils down to, can you rationalize reality around you? Which is, why do people behave the way you say they do? Why do institutions form the way they do? What are the incentives for a company to do this? What are the incentives for, let's say, a government to do this? And I think this is the most interesting part of debating because it really forces you to take an outward look on everything around you and sort of figure out why do things happen the way you say they happen. And I think there are many useful applications for this in real life, which helps you in academics, obviously, but also in terms of just other things in life as well. But why debating in particular, as opposed to, let's say, Model UN or like mock trials, if you guys are interested in that? So I started debating personally during the pandemic, which is also the same time that Aadit started. This is around 2021, or I guess the end of 2020. And I was very bored. Like there was nothing to do. I was just stuck in my house. I literally had nothing to do. I was bored out of my mind. And then this one time, my senior in CGS came up to me. She said, "Hey, do you want to do pre-rolls?" And I was like, "Sure." And then the rest is history. But I think what I learned from that is debating really is the most interesting thing that you can do in high school. Like I will genuinely debate you on this, and I've heard I'm quite good at that. But like if you're in high school, what else do you have to do? The fact that you get to travel to all these different countries, you get to discuss all of these interesting ideas, and I think those are just very important things, which is why I've continued debating. So on the left, you can see me. This was during World Schools. The round itself was traumatic, but the picture I think is quite good. And over here, you can see a picture of me in university. This was in USC. So I've still continued debating, and I think this is something that I still find a lot of joy, a lot of passion in, and I hope you guys will as well. More about my lore, because I think it's quite interesting, but I want you guys to take away two things. The first is there's a lot of ups and downs in my stories as well, as there was in like Lamia's and Aadit's, and I think this is a defining feature of everyone's debating life stories. But the second more important thing is that what value do you gain from debating? Right. And I think this is an important question. So a lot of people find value in community, which is great. A lot of people find value in the intellectual side of things. I found value in the competitiveness, which is I was a very competitive person in high school. I suppose I still am. And I think I found a lot of value in just winning. Like, yes, winning isn't everything, but it feels very good. And I think that's great. So if you're very competitive like me, I think you'll enjoy debating as well. But I think the way I would describe my debating journey is that it started very suddenly and there wasn't a lot of thought done to it. And I think that spontaneous action sort of led to greater things happening. So, as I mentioned, I did pre-worlds in 2020, but my team had like no prep. We literally decided we would do pre-worlds like 3 days before pre-worlds or like a few days before pre-worlds. And we didn't even prep the prep motions because I remember on the Facebook page, it said that the org-com has the right to not use any prep motions and we assumed they wouldn't. They did. So we did not break in 2020 pre-worlds. So please prep for your prep motions. But I was the novice best speaker of that tournament, and I think this was a very cool moment for me. One, because the guy who was giving the motions, sorry, the speaker awards mispronounced my name, and it was very funny how he said it. So he said something like Shayor Ahmed, which is not how you say my name, and I thought that was very funny. And then after that, I found like a whole community and I continued debating. So I was the best open speaker at Pre-Worlds 2022, which for me was a big milestone because I went from novice to open. I thought that was pretty great. We don't talk about 2021 because stuff happens, I guess. And then I also had the pleasure and the opportunity to do WSDC alongside 9 wonderful people from 2021 to 2023. And I think I was able to learn a lot of wonderful things, a lot of great experiences, as well as having the opportunity to compete in university, to the World Universities Debating Championships. I was there with Lamia in Vietnam, and I thought we had a lot of fun. Big wins. You get to brag to your friends. Very important. You get friends. Less important. You get to do world schools. Genuinely the best time of my life. Like we went to Vietnam. You get to travel. You get to meet a lot of cool people. And I think for you guys, that would be a very exciting opportunity as well. I think it definitely helped me with my university admission as well, like Lamia said. And lastly, just the travel itself was quite interesting. I think this last year I've just been in these 5 countries just because of debating, and I think that's really important. But what I want to emphasize though is that I had a lot of losses or like challenges in debating. Just to name a few, I think the transition from high school debating to university debating was quite difficult for me because the academics does tend to steep up quite a lot. I think that competing internationally itself could be quite the difficulty because, well, I think once you compete against other people from other countries, obviously there's the problem that you are ESL, they may not be ESL, so how do you sort of reconcile with that? There's also the fact that, you know, perhaps these people had more fundings in their schools or their institutions because of which they could afford to do things that we from Bangladesh sadly could not. So how do you deal with that? And I think that gave me a lot of problems that I had to deal with while doing world schools because you did have to compete against those people. Imposter syndrome, as Aadit said. So I made it to the team at a time at which it was considered very quick. And because of that, I was like, okay, perhaps the coach has made a mistake. Maybe I don't deserve to be in the team because I was still a novice at the time. So, and that for me was like a big challenge that I had to sort of overcome. And I think my teammates really helped me do that. But the last thing here, and I think this is really interesting, perhaps you guys will relate, perhaps you won't, but I think the idea that you're a small fish in a big ocean really resonates with me because when I started debating, the idea was if you make it to Team Bangladesh, that's really cool. And then I made it to Team Bangladesh, but the idea then was if you need to break at Worlds in order to be considered a good team or like a team. But by the time we had broken, there was this sense amongst our coaches at least that Bangladesh can do more than just break at Worlds because around this time, Sajid Paya had literally just won Worlds Universities. We were also not the first team to break at Worlds in 2021. So there was an idea then that you need to do more and you need to achieve more, which I think initially I struggled with, but then propelled me to go above and beyond and try my best to do whatever I could. And I think because of that, I improved quite a lot. So how do you improve, right? Right. So I think these are things that a lot of people need to understand, and I think these are things that Lamia and Aadit have also touched on. So I'll just briefly go over it. The first thing is I think debating is actually like pretty interesting. Just intellectually, it's very thought-provoking, I think. There's a very diverse set of motions, so it doesn't matter what you're interested in. It doesn't matter if you hate philosophy. There's a good chance if you're really into sports, there's going to be a sports motion and vice versa. I think competition itself is good, and I think you can just start with your personal interests, right? Like if you're not sure if you want to do debate or if you want to just get better at debating, just pick something you're very passionate about and debate on that. And I think that's a very interesting way to sort of improve. The next thing is failure, right? I think there's a very steep learning curve to debating. And maybe this is a hot take. I actually don't think debating is intuitive at all because a lot of the ways in which debaters talk, a normal person would be like, what are you doing? Like, no normal person goes, there are 4 reasons you should listen to me. Similarly, the concept in debating that I really struggled with was the assumption of fiat or the idea that you can do something. So for example, if you look at debates in parliament or debates in like politics in general, and there's a bill presented, the biggest argument that everyone talks about is can we afford this? Right? Like with universal healthcare, the only debate is can we afford this? Or should schools do this? The question then becomes can we afford this? But in many times in debating, we already assume we can afford it, and then we just discuss whether it's good or bad. And I think just intuitively that didn't seem quite right for me, at least at the beginning. So I think those are things that you quite struggle with. But it's just the idea that the lived experiences that you had in Bangladesh is quite different from a judge who maybe lived in Norway or the US. And because of that, what you find intuitive is not what they find intuitive, which is what I like to call the intuition block, right? And I think this is the biggest piece of advice that I can give to anyone is that in debating, it's very important to prove things, as in don't assert it. Like explain why something is true and then explain why it's important. And I think somewhat counterintuitively, what helped me do this was O-level economics because I was reading my textbook for O-level econ, and like every page, it would be like, there are 3 reasons why something is true. There are 4 reasons why the demand curve does this, this, and that. And I think once you start doing O-level economics or like O-levels and A-levels in general, and you look at the mark scheme, or just a general mentality in exam that you should write as many things as you can in order to score the maximum points possible, I think the same is also true for debating. You should generally try to write or say as many things as possible in order to have the most amount of points, most amount of speaker points, or just win. The question then becomes, how do you say stuff or how do you research? And I think Lamia and Aadit had some great advice on this. I'll just briefly say things that helped me. I think it's a great idea to follow pages like CNN, BBC Economist on Instagram, because when you're doom scrolling or just scrolling through Insta and you see their story or you see their post, that's an instant understanding of what's happening worldwide. Even if you don't read through it, at least you know what's happening, so you can still debate on it. The next thing is, every week or so, different news channels have like The World This Week, which I would recommend reading because it's just a quick snapshot of everything that's happening worldwide. You instantly know it, and then you can move on with your life. But I think it gets the job done. The third, and this is a personal approach, read 3 articles. It can be on anything that you like, as long as you read those 3 articles. I think the discipline itself is more important than the fact that you're reading it. So personally, I read articles on microeconomics or like consumer behavior. What do consumers want? I read stuff on macro. So what is the central bank doing with inflation? And I read about an interesting development in the business world. So who acquired who bought who, what are shares doing? I'm a bit of a finance bro, so you don't have to be like this, but you could, and I think that'd be really cool. There's also a lot of networking opportunities, in the sense that you can reach out to all of your seniors, such as Lamia and Aadit. I guess me too, but reach out to Lamia and Aadit first for help, and I'm sure they will help you. I will too, I suppose. The most important thing is you just find someone to practice debating with, and I think that's a pretty important thing. You find a community who are also very into this thing with you, and I think that really helps you get into the mindset. Speaking of mindset, though, I think the biggest problem that a lot of ESL debaters like us have is this idea that given that we are ESL, there is a ceiling that we cannot cross. And luckily, I think Bangladesh debating as well as global debating has evolved sufficiently to the point at which we have a lot of great role models who show you that the ESL barrier is not a definitive barrier and that you can actually draw on your personal experiences to have powerful illustrations. So, for example, given that you live in a country like Bangladesh, where a lot of things tend to happen, um, what is considered debating for someone who lives in the West, for example, is a theoretical concept about a different country that they don't live in. For us, it's literally our surroundings. So we already have a head start when it comes to matter research because we've lived the matter research. I also think this means that you can use very powerful illustrations about the world around you to make your arguments a lot stronger. The last piece of advice that anyone gave me is that you should be a theater kid when you're debating, because debating is literally just theater or just like doing stage, right? The way in which you speak, the way in which you modulate your voices. A lot of these things are tactics in theater, and I think doing those things helped improve my style. Which brings me to what I call the cheat sheet that I made, which is like broadly, what should you focus on if you want to be better? And I think over the right, these are the 3 important like scoring criterions in WSDC. So we have style, content, and strategy. Lamia already did a great job in explaining this, but I'll just briefly go over it. I think in terms of style, it's a good idea to emulate some of the great, especially ESL debaters, to sort of find your groove. And luckily, there's a lot of good examples from Bangladesh. For example, Zahid Kondakar, Shor, Mubarak Wasi, just to name a few. I think it's always a good idea to have great intros. I think people underestimate the power of a good introduction because realistically, you make the biggest impression in a debate in the first 15 seconds of your speech, because this is when the judge makes a subconscious call to continue listening or not pay as much attention. And I think intros are a great way to sort of get started there. And I think it's important to find your own style, because I think every debater has their own style, so you should draw on your personal experiences to do one. Don't be a metronome, like, don't be monotonous, have variances in your voice. And this is just my personal take. You should avoid speaking at the speed of light. I don't think anyone can keep up. I don't think it's a great move stylistically. Of course, there are great debaters who do speak very fast. I just prefer speaking slow. In terms of content, I think the best way to do this is to sort of watch as many debates as possible. One, because if you watch like debates on like tough questions, you already do the research on it itself. So it's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But the second thing is, I guess research is important. Everyone should matter file. Though I personally never matter filed, but that's because I'm lazy, but you guys are better than that. And I think practice itself is quite important. In terms of strategy, though, this is the hardest to explain because strategy is the least intuitive part of debating, but it's also equally important. But it just boils down to, assuming you can prove stuff, why do I care about what you just proved? Or how do you frame stuff to look very important? And it's very difficult to explain how to get better at this, which is why it's a great thing that BDC Digital Academy will have courses on all of these things, which I highly recommend you people joining. So please do that. But the only thing that I can say, though, is that there is a steep learning curve, and when it happens, it just happens. When it clicks, everything just sort of makes sense, and you're in that groove, and then everything just goes swimmingly until you lose again, and then it's all from scratch. In terms of how you get better at this, I think discipline is the most important thing that you can get away with. You need to embrace the grind. You must use all available resources online, and there are a lot of resources online. So for example, lectures on debating that is available. I think these are great to watch. In terms of books, I'll say that I was interested in politics, philosophy, and econ before I got into debating. So I was already reading up on these things even before I started debating. But I think this practice sort of helped me in terms of how I got better at philosophy. I actually read quite a lot of books on philosophy in order to help me get better in debating, but also because I was interested in them. If you guys want recommendations of books, feel free to reach out to me, and I will get back to you hopefully. And I think these are great practices. I think in terms of community, you really must engage with the public and public speaking because it's a great way to bond, make friends, have communities. Back in my days, we had practice MUN. We also had practice debates. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't. I graduated school last year. But I think these are not things that other people made, right? Like it was just a bunch of friends getting together and we started a group chat called Practice MUN. And then a few weeks later, the group chat had 80 people and every day we would have a spar. And I think this is just a really great way to get better. These are things that you can do by yourself. And I think this would help you get better. Because I think it's important to remember when you're starting and you want to get better, if you're half as good, you must work twice as hard, right? Instead of, blaming other circumstances for why you're not as good. You just can control the things that are in your control and try to get better at that. But the question then is, how do you balance academics and debates? Because debating is great, but it's also great to not fail in your studies. However, I am of the belief that one helps the others, right? I think econ helped me a lot in debating because a lot of the analysis that I use in debates are literally that what I learned from my econ classes or textbooks. I assume a similar approach also applies if you're studying business. Obviously, it helps you in university applications. It helped me, Lamia, and Aadit. And I think it also improves your English skills as well. So I think all of us are uh, much more confident in speaking in English now because of debating, especially as ESL speakers. But this is also important if you're studying for like the SAT or IELTS. Obviously, English is a part there, and I think debating helped me improve in that as well. But the most important takeaway from debating is the ability to sort of systematically approach a problem, break it down into subcategories, and explain why those subcategories sort of solve themselves. And I think this approach helps you a lot when you're studying in university, for example, or if you're later working on various projects. And I think this approach is really important then. And I think this problem-solving ability is the single most important ability that you can sort of take away from debating. So if nothing else, at the very least, at the end of the day, you become better problem solvers, which in and of itself, I think, is a very good advantage. But that's about it from my end. Thank you all very much for joining. I understand that it is very late in Dhaka right now and that tomorrow is a school night. So thank you all very much for taking your time to get here. We'll now open the floor to questions. If you have any, please let us know. You can raise your hand or just leave it in the chat.
Does anyone want to have a go at the first question? Or should I?
You can do it.
You can start.
So the first question that just popped up is, how do you balance presenting your prepared arguments with responding to unexpected point made by the opposition? So I think this varies a lot according to what position you're filling up. So it's likely that you either the DPM or the whip or the DLO or of course the up whip. So for whips, your entire speech structure is just summarizing the whole debate in 3 clashes. So you're just going to be able to like replying to a lot of the points that were presented and then weighing out what you brought from your side or what your LO and DLO or your DPM and PM presented. As far as DLO and DPM goes, I think you'll eventually have one or another video from Digital Academy itself about how to like do second speaking or rebutting. But oftentimes, whatever works, it's like you split kind of your speech into half, whether you spend like the first 3 minutes of your speech just responding to whatever op said, and then the last 4 minutes just impacting and comparing everything that you just said. So I think that's just, it gets better with practice when you're like consistently giving speeches. And I, like we all suggested, should watch a lot of second speaker or third speaker or whatever speaker that you are thinking about, and see how they also balance those rebuttals versus presenting their own constructive case.
How do I get better making good intros? Lami, do you want to take it or should I? Okay. So I think for me, I don't know if there was a specific regimen or like a specific thing that I did to make that better, but I think um it just it for a lot of people I think it comes naturally, which I've seen Shayor do it as well. But I think the best way to do, like, at least train for it is firstly just watching a lot of very good debaters who use very fancy or very illustrative rhetoric. And I have examples where you have Boseo's infamous 2016 speech, which arguably might not have been as good of a speech as people claim it to be, but rhetoric wise, it was really, really good. And then you have debaters like Hamza who also use very interesting and funny and very snarky rhetoric. So, but I think the best way to do this is WSDC videos, because I think every WSDC first speaker, at least an ideal WSDC first speaker, has a very catchy intro. And I think just watching those. But I think the fundamentals of those like very catchy intros, regardless of where you're going, is that because you know what you're going to talk about in your speech, because you already have your notes prepared, just try and illustrate whatever you have in those technical arguments that you're making in a like a 30-second sentence or a story, like a very emotional, a very illustrative, a very descriptive summary of what you want to say or the most important part that you want to highlight. And I think that 30 seconds, if you're able to explain it and summarize it um, in a very visual manner, you're going to be good at making good intros.
Okay, I'll take it. So how can I handle difficult or unexpected questions from my opponents? I think there's a mentality way to approach it, and then there's how you actually approach it, which is in terms of like when you're prepping, there is no realistic way in which like you will think of everything that they will say. I think a big mistake that a lot of people get into while prep time is that you will think of an argument, someone goes, but what if they say this? And then you just stop doing the argument, which I get why people do it, but like realistically, your opponents aren't going to prep for 30 minutes and give a 2-minute speech, right? They will speak for as long as you do. So almost always they will say something that you don't expect. And I think you need to be mentally prepared for it. The question then becomes, how do you handle it? We will have a lot of sessions on this as well, but here's my approach. I think the first is just show that whatever you're talking about is more important, or weighing, as we like to call it. This is more important in BP than in WSDC, but I think the strategy is the same. Just show that whatever I am saying is the most important thing in this round, and an average person would think this way. Therefore, you should credit whatever I am saying more than whatever they're saying. So it doesn't matter if they're saying something that's unexpected because what they're saying is unimportant. The second thing is, if they do say something that is completely unexpected, it has nothing to do with what you prepped on. Either you messed up in prep time or they messed up in prep time. So figure out what happened, try to make sure it's not the former, and then like make sure it is clear to the judge that whatever they're saying is not relevant to the round and you have won by default. I hope that answers that.
Oh, also, I wanted to add something. Is it okay if I do that?
No.
Okay, yeah. The other thing is that I think uh, if difficult or unexpected, I feel like your question would also mean that it's valid, but like you didn't prep for it, right? So like Sharon says, you can weigh it off. But I think the other thing is that, and it's really important that a lot of like new debaters don't think of it, is that everything in a debate is contestable. Nothing in a debate is absolute. So regardless of what you say or what they say, you can always say no to that. So you can reject their premise and you can respond to it. So I think the mentality thing that Sharon talks about, if you have a mentality that, okay, whatever they say, I will just say why that's not true. If you have that, then you'll force yourself to find reasons. So you just practice the art of being able to say no. So if they say this happens, you say no, and then you find 3 reasons as to why that won't happen. And you'll always find those reasons.
You can take the next one. Which was, how should I prepare a script if I have no understanding of the motion? Okay, so 2 cases. It's likely that you actually do know something about the motion. If it's a very random motion, it's likely there's going to be some inflow slide that explains the background and the context. So you need to, I think, be confident about some basics. So if it's, let's say, the ones that are most usually things that people don't know about, maybe IR stuff, or very specific diplomatic thing that I was talking about in like when I was like going through speed running the meta building. If it's a China motion, you probably do know something, that it's a communist country, or the fact that there's more social enterprises. So it's very centralized control, or intentions, or how they have historically worked, or the trade war. Some things that you can drag out of what you know and then use it to analyze their future patterns or their current decisions. And B, the second case is probably you actually don't know anything, which probably might be a slight bit of a problem, which means that you should go through like a minimum of like at least an hour a week in total, just going through headlines of what's happening. So if you don't know about certain things that are happening in Middle East right now, or election season that's in America, that's probably a problem. So you should build towards a work ethic where at least some parts of your day in a week includes you looking up some headlines of current affairs. And it's very likely in schools debating and in tournaments, whether it's local or international, they're not going to give you a motion that is absolutely out of reach of like some intuitive information or some information that are just generalized to all individuals.
So you want to take the second one, or should I take it?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll take it. You can take the next one then. All right. How do you approach a motion more accurately? I think a lot of what Lamia said just like applies here as well. But I also think that to understand what a motion really wants, you should take some time and read it. There are often like motions oftentimes have buzzwords, where it's like this house would actively, so actively being a buzzword, or I don't know, incentivize, or certain things that exist in a motion. So I think being able to identify those buzzwords, and then trying to imagine what the world would look like if this motion did take place. So if this house would ban Shayor, right? So you imagine a world in which Shayor does not exist. And I think through that you'd be able to understand what the motion really wants from you. And through that you can approach what you need to do for that motion accordingly. So what a world without Shayor would look like, and why that promises you a much happier world.
Sorry, can I add something? Okay.
No.
Thank you. I think a lot of motions, especially at world schools, is very like stock. And I think this is something that someone asked as well. How do you use stock motions? Or is it stoic? Okay, we'll get to stoic as well. But for stock motions, I think a lot of debates are quite formulaic. Like, for example, if you look at politics motions in developing countries, they're most of the time about similar things. In a post-conflict society, how do we rebuild our nation? How do developing countries improve their economies? Do we ban megacities? Do we not like megacities? Should we export or should we make our own stuff? And I think a lot of these things are very formulaic that once you get the hang of it, it's literally the same. Like I'm a big advocate that Cambridge mark schemes are a good way to get better at debating, because once you keep doing enough of those like practice exams and you memorize the mark schemes, the rest of the questions sort of become very intuitive. And I think it's the same thing with debating, right? Like once you do enough of it, you get the hang of it to the point at which it's like muscle memory. Like, how do you prove this? Oh, I did this 3 debates ago. I know the analysis for this. And I think, and judging by the reactions, they probably disagree, but this is just my take. But I think this is like a great way to improve at debating. It just becomes formulaic after a point, and you don't even need to think about it that much. Although you should. I'll take the next question. How do you avoid awkward pauses? There's a couple of things you can do here. I think a big reason why people tend to pause or say stuff like in the middle of their speeches is because they're currently thinking faster than they're speaking. So the rate at which their mind processes is faster than what their mouths can actually say. So I think then it's very important to like make your speeches into like a good format that you can easily follow during a round. You can give yourself timestamps that by the end of 1 minute 30 seconds, I will have this and that done. I can take a POI, but the POI will take no longer than 30 seconds maximum. This argument will be explained in 3 minutes. I think that's a good habit to have to sort of make sure that you're not in that situation. But let's say it's a reverse of the situation, which is you don't have enough to talk about, so you're just pausing a lot, which I think happens to a lot of people who are new. In that case, then, I think it's important to have a debate checklist and make sure you're doing everything. Because if you are doing everything, you'll notice that 8 minutes isn't too much. In fact, it's not enough. What is that checklist? Make sure that you have proven everything that you are saying you're proven. Make sure that everything you are saying has an example or an illustration or both. Make sure that you're weighing everything or what you're proving whatever you're saying is important. And I think these are good habits to have to make sure that you never run into that situation. In terms of just speech drills, I think they tend to help a lot. So our coaches in 2023 had me and Aadit give speeches in front of a mirror. They had us record those speeches and send it to them, and they would judge us based on how well we spoke in front of a mirror. It's quite strange, but I think it helped us improve, or at least it helped me. I don't know about Aadit, but it helped me a lot. So I think those things are quite helpful as well.
Lamia, you want to take the next one? When to use stoic arguments?
Honestly, for this, I just think follow debaters that give stoic arguments, quite frankly. I think when it comes to debating, for me, it comes a little naturally, depending on what the motion is demanding. So if it needs me to be very specifically logical and very specifically structural in the way I run the case, I just do it in terms of like, oh, these are the 4 reasons why this is going to happen, or this is not going to happen, or this is going to be effective and not effective. But then there are like more like rhetorical motions, which could either be philosophical ones or about human beings choosing one job over another, passion over like capital, like work, monetary incentives, and all of that. So in those cases, I think I just run a case where I imagine myself as the actor in the motion. So I think it just depends on how I'm preparing the case that I approach the stoic arguments.
Okay, I can take the next one, but I need a clarification. What do you mean by a strong motion approach? Qazi, Ryan, Hasim. Or okay, I'll talk about when to use nuanced arguments and detailed characterizations, and then yeah. So I think characterizations and arguments are like characterization is important in every debate that you do. I think in some debates, especially like in BP, there are a lot of debates where you can win without arguments just because your framing and characterization of the debate is really, really good. Because you can co-opt a lot of the benefits that other teams would probably say. Um, but I think in 3v3, you obviously need to have a set list of arguments. And I think in WSDC it's the meta is like having a lot of impacts, big impacts. However, certain motions require you to have low impacts because the motions aren't that heavy. The motions require smaller niche issues. So I think when you're making argumentation, where like building argumentation or like making detailed characterizations, you just need to understand what the motion wants from you. If the motion's something that deals with a larger group of people, then you can probably avoid nuanced arguments that tackle a very small group like disenfranchised communities, and you can talk about how this would affect the world in general, and less detailed characterization on what this group looks like or how they operate in certain ways. And in motions that require you to be more specific, like again, this sounds as Aadit would ban Shayor, you would have to be me to ban Shayor instead of the whole world. So you'd have to characterize very specifically and make very nuanced arguments based on who and what you're targeting.
That there's a clarification.
Oh, okay. Referring to a direct and focused approach to debating the core issues of the motion. Yeah, same thing that I said. So again, if the motion requires you to be more specific, you become more nuanced and you become excessively detailed because you would have to be excessively detailed, right? If you're dealing with a specific group of community or a specific group of people or a specific community, you try to be nuanced. But if you're dealing with the whole world or like a country in general, you have to be nuanced, but you don't have to be excessively detailed. You can just be more core issues of the motion and all of that.
Okay, I'll take the next question. So how do I prepare for a value judgment motion? I think this is my take on it. I am not a big personal fan of prepping for motion types. Like, I am not a big fan of going, guys, let's prep this house wood debates. The only motion type that I struggled in a lot is retrospective motions because they tend to be the least intuitive. Like, how do you make a world from the beginning of existence that looked like that? So I needed some work on this, but I personally don't like prep a motion like, okay, today we will prep this house believes that motions. Tomorrow we will prep this house would motions. I just like to prep motion types or like motion themes in general. Like today we'll prep criminal justice. Tomorrow we'll do philosophy. Day after that we'll do like something else. And I think when you tend to do this, you inevitably end up prepping on value judgment motions in and of itself. And I think that's that. In terms of how would I actually approach value judgment motions, I think you need to break it down. So first, set up framework. Like if you're an average human being, these are the values you care about. Is it utilitarianism? Is it something else? And then here's why our arguments best satisfy those values. And I think those are pretty interesting. This is something I was going to say in my presentation, but then I forgot. So I think this is quite important. Um, Back when we used to prep as a team in WSDC or prep in general, we would normally throw a motion. All of us would go, nah, we don't like this motion. And then we would have a discussion as to why we don't like the motion. But I think that discussion is very fruitful as well. Whether we're discussing why this motion is a pain often means we're identifying that this particular clash in this debate from this side is very annoying to prove. And the fact that we're identifying it is quite important. Or my other favorite activity would be we would find a motion and we would argue why it was imbalanced from one side to another. And I think while we were doing that, we were also like generating arguments for both sides. And I think these fun activities are quite important. So when you're doing this, I guess it also helps you in value judgment rounds. I hope that made sense.
I can take over the next one. So supposing the ops arguments are so well built that it's hard to rebut or speak against, how would you tackle this type of situation? To be very honest with you, no op will ever have an argument that's so well built that you can't have a dent on it. There are like you will definitely have a rebuttal session from Digital Academy, so you'll see the different types of rebuttals you can argue. But one of the first ones is, of course, mitigation. Mitigation can be a bunch of things, whether questioning what they claimed is realistic. So let's assume they're claiming that a certain institution will have a certain capacity to exert or like make a certain change. It's likely that they either don't have the incentive to exert this change or don't have the capacity for this change. So like there's always some mitigation you can do. One of the other things, I think Shayor covered this as well, is just make them sound irrelevant. Like, will the change actually happen? Will it accomplish any real impact for people who are the most vulnerable stakeholders in society? And if not, like there's also a way to flip arguments and be like, you achieve this and so do I. Under my world, this works too. So I'm not necessarily sure what difference your side of the motion makes or what delta there exists to your claims. So I think definitely that, but also if you're finding it hard to rebut against certain mechanisms, just prep a lot of rebutting drill, like do a lot of rebutting drills, go through a bunch of speakers, hear them rebut. I think once you get into the drill and excessively do it, it'll start clicking to you after a certain point.
Okay. How do I get better at taking notes of web speeches? I think this is more my area. So I feel like the way that I did it in Wells schools is and even in BP whenever I'm with, is that I basically I was a whip, yeah, that's why. I still am, to be fair. So what I did or what I still do is that I take like you obviously have whatever size of paper that you prefer. I prefer an A4 paper, right? I used to fold it in half, and then I used to write down prop and op, and depending on which side I'm in, I'd put that on the left and right. You can choose whichever side you prefer, that's fine. And I would just flow what they're saying, right? Especially what the other team is saying. And it's extremely important to flow as a, it's important to flow regardless, but as a whip, it's essential that you know everything that's going on because you are dealing with a job that requires you to remind everyone what the debate was about and why your team definitely takes over everything that they've said, right? So it's really important that you flow it and that you categorize it in a specific manner. But I also think it's quite important to be ready with what you want to target and focus by the time that the second speaker of your team is speaking. So for me, if I was um prop or op, like regardless of which side, Shayor was my second speaker and I was going third, right? So by the time Shayor was speaking in those 8 minutes, because I knew somewhat of what Shayor was covering, even though I had to hear him, I was I was I had enough notes to build on what I was going to say. So by that time, you should know exactly what the other like another team or like your opponent's saying. So it's crucial that you are able to categorize what you're saying, what they're saying, and link those back and have those notes ready by the time your second speaker is speaking, because that's when you should be preparing for the speech you have.
All right, I'll take what appears to be the last question. How do I tackle motions that genuinely sound dumb and are really difficult to squeeze logic out of? This is very interesting, and I agree with the spirit of this question. I think there are dumb motions, and I hate them very much. But usually I think dumb motions just boil down to motions that you think are unimportant, is what would happen to me. So back when I was a schools debater, I had a lot stronger thoughts on this, but it was my opinion that the only debates that are ever worth debating on are those that are policy rounds or econ rounds or stuff that the average person cares about. Like when I would walk into an art round, I would just be like, why am I doing this? Who cares about this? Right? This is personally because I personally never like cared much about it. But I think you get better at it once you start reading more into it. And then you realize that these are really important things. And there's no dumb motions. There's just motions that you're uninformed about, temporarily at least. And I think once you start getting a hang of it, then you're better. This is true. I do have PTSD from art rounds. Um, but I think once you start reading up to it, you start appreciating it, or you don't appreciate it, you just understand enough to debate on it. Either works. I still don't appreciate art, but that's just me. Um, the other thing is, what do you do if you see emotion and you genuinely have no clue how to argue it? Like you don't know at all. Which is why I think it's good to have teammates who have different interests than you do. So for example, I hated art, but Aadit loved art. For whatever reason, he would know random things about pop culture and movie references that I personally could care less about. Similarly, I was never a big fan of sports motion. Aadit loves sports motions, so he got me there. And I think it's great to have teammates who have different interests than you so you can do better. Worst case scenario, it's a philosophy motion, and no one likes a philosophy motion. All three of you suck at it. What do you do then? Chances are the other side is also not very good at it, which means that you don't need to be the best in the world. You just need to be slightly better than the other person. So I guess that's fair. Oh, there's a clarification. I mean, just consider emotion about UFOs. That sounds like a complete fantasy. This is true, but then you can also be creative, right? Like I did very fun motions about this house as a Pokemon trainer would do this. And I was like, okay, obviously it's not realistic, but it's very interesting. And I think these interesting motions really have the most room for creativity. And perhaps you guys disagree, but I think ultimately debating, or the fun part of debating, is about having big, bold ideas that make you question how you view life, or at the very least that make you go, wow, that's such a cool argument. And I think that these motions that are more loose, let's say, have more avenue for bold debating. I think that's quite interesting. I hope that answers that. Okay, I don't see any more questions. All right, chat, we made it.
Thank you
Sure.
guys for the wonderful session. It was fun.
If you have any questions,
Yeah.
feel free to reach out to Lamia and Aadit. Once they have reached
And
out to you,
Shayor. And Shayor.
if you
Yeah,
still
no
have questions, then reach out to
question.
me.
I think you should
Sounds good.
reach out to Shayor first, and
Yeah.
then you can text Lamia and I. I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
reach out to you as well. No, we're
I'll reach out
joking.
to
Like
you in 3 to 4 business days.
He's very active on Messenger.
he's always on Messenger. Yeah.
This is true.
But yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out to either any of us or like anyone that you would want to reach out to as well. We can't assure that they'd reply to you, but we're sure that we will. Um, Again, just remind yourself that you should
Yeah,
not
be
hire via Messenger.
like,
Completely right. Yeah. So Shayor Bhaiya can then forward the message to us if he wants to, or if he can handle it on his own, then yeah. All right, but that's it. Thank you so much. See you guys. Have fun in pre-worlds or whatever tournament you're doing next. I'm sure you guys are gonna do great. Bye
Right.
bye.